This is my 19.1 OAA PowerPoint talking about the organisation's health and safety and environmental considerations that you have to take into account when performing any outdoor adventurous activity. Right, so the first thing is safety. This is a sort of broad topic. HSE, well, these are all factors that affect safety when taking part in outdoor adventurous activities. So, HSE, Health and Safety Executive, these are this is basically a large organisation that governs all of the health and safety aspects, whether this is something you're doing in your leisure time, so an outdoor adventurous activity, or if you're in the workplace. It sets risk assessments and identifies potential hazards that you can come across when performing these outdoor adventurous activities. Adventurous Activities Licensing Authority, or AALA, this is an organisation that goes into specific detail of the risk assessments for each of these individual activities. So all of these outdoor adventurous activities such as kayaking, rock climbing, windsurfing, just anything along those lines. Hazards and risk assessments, these are basically documents documents that take into consideration all of the potential risks that could occur due to taking part in an activity such as drowning when kayaking due to going through rapids or something like that, or falling from a climbing wall and injuring or breaking an arm, something like that. So then, moving on to the thing that would sort of prevent this, PPE, or personal protective equipment. This will be things that will prevent the certain hazards from occurring. So, say, going back to the drowning, when going through the rapids, when kayaking, you would be wearing a life jacket or some form of buoyancy aid that would keep you afloat and prevent you from drowning, or at least reduce the risk of you drowning. Rock climbing, falling and hitting your head, you make sure that you are wearing a helmet or some form of body protection, or such as elbow pads, knee pads, something like that. If you're climbing on an open rock face, something like that. You might even wear gloves just to prevent yourself from cutting your hands, something like that. So moving on to precautions. These are basically set guidelines that are put into place to prevent the hazards from occurring, or remove the hazards entirely. So, say getting washed out to sea when kayaking, this could be due to a change in weather conditions. So basically a precaution to this would be to make sure that you've checked the weather before going kayaking, and if it looks as if the weather is about to turn when the session is supposed to be on, or the weather is going to get very bad during the session should be either cancelled or moved to a different location that will not allow for the weather to directly influence the session. Right. Moving on to safety equipment. This is also along the lines of personal protective equipment. This could be anything that protects you against the potential hazards or risks of injury occurring due to taking part in the activity. So, like I said earlier, the helmets, the gloves, buoyancy aids, things like that. They're just pieces of equipment that are specifically designed in order to protect you. Right, moving on to emergency procedures. So this would be anything from, this is basically set guidelines of what you're supposed to do when something goes wrong. So say someone falls off a climbing wall and breaks their arm, you will then know exactly what to do at that point, so you'll know the exact first aid steps that you have to take, and then you will also know that you have to contact an ambulance and then give your location, and so this is also similar to sort of contingency plans. So these are basically your pre-made plans to counter something that's gone wrong. So say that the weather changes and it becomes too stormy to be open water kayaking, you will then have a river or a lake or something like that you can change to that will prevent someone, say, getting washed out to sea. Moving on to the environmental considerations that you have to make when taking part in an OAA activity. First of these is NNR, which is National Nature Reserves. These are basically preserved areas of land that are left and are looked after by councils and the government, as they're seen as areas of beauty for the country. So this means that there is specific guidelines as to what you can do in these areas. So say, for example, say Sussex Orienteering wanted to run an event on the South Downs, there would be specific guidelines set as well to what they can do in this area, as this is a nature reserve, or this is protected land. So this will basically mean that there'll be certain areas that you can and can't go, and there'll be certain things you can and can't do in this area, and you'll have to follow the set guidelines made by the government. Right, moving on to CROW, or Countryside's Right of Way Act. This is also similar to an NNR, and it is basically a scheme that's made in 2000, and it was basically designed in trying to get more people out into the countryside. However, at the same time, it was also designed around the protection of the local environments. This is quite similar to an NNR again. Anyway, moving on to the Countryside Agency. This is basically an agency that goes around trying to protect the countryside, much the same as an NNR, like the Natural Nature Reserves. This will just look after local areas of beauty and make sure that they are unaffected by activities going on in them. So this will then in turn limit what you can do in these areas, but at the same time this is there just to protect the environment. Moving on to the Countryside Code, this is basically a set of rules that you must abide by when in these open, like, green areas. So this would be, say you were crossing the South Downs, this would be closing the gates each time you go through them to prevent harm coming to the livestock that is grazing there. Not littering, so making sure all of your rubbish either goes in your bag or in any of the bins provided at set points along your route. Also means keeping your dogs on leads when you're in fields with livestock in, so that you don't scare the animals or potentially harm the animals. Right, so moving on to erosion. Erosion is a process that happens when an area gets overused. So say orienteering, if an orienteering event was held every month in exactly the same location using exactly the same routes, the ground would become eroded, as it would have many people walking over it constantly. And a better example of this would be climbing. If you kept climbing exactly the same route, if a club kept climbing the same route, the rock face would start to become eroded and start to wear away as it'd be overused. So this is something you have to take into account. So this would mean either climbing less of the same route, or simply just changing the route so every time you go climbing, you climb in a different area, something like this. Pollution. This comes in many different forms, whether it is sound, like noise pollution, air pollution. So noise pollution, this would be using motor vehicles in areas of natural beauty, such as like dirt bikes, motorbikes, quad bikes, something like that, that would ruin these areas of natural beauty, something like that. It could put other people off going there. Anything along those lines. Also, as silly as it sounds, like playing loud music in these areas. Both these things, they also could put off the animals living there and destroy the wildlife, because animals might not necessarily like the loudest of noises. So this could scare species away from certain parts that they've been known to live in. Air pollution. This could also be down to using the vehicles in this area. This could be quite bad because obviously it could poison and sort of damage the local areas. This could also be an issue with skydiving. If you're skydiving above an area of natural beauty, or this could be quite noisy because the planes keep taking off. So every sort of 10-15 minutes you'd hear a plane take off. This could sort of ruin the area itself. This would also be air pollution, or it would also be actual physical pollution of the greenhouse gases coming out of the vehicle, out of the engine. This also comes into sort of tie-in with disturbance of flora and fauna. This is basically disturbance of plant life and animal life that are in certain areas. So say you were going quad biking in a field, and there were certain species living around the edges of the field of plants and animals, and these got dug up by, well, the animals obviously wouldn't get dug up, but plants got dug up by these quad bikes. It would then stop them being able to grow there because the ground would be all churned up, kind of like that. Scaring off the animals would be if they're hearing such loud noises such as a quad bike, something like that, using that example again. It would put them off living in an area. It could scare them away from an area, and it could diminish the amount of that species that are in that area. The final part is construction of facilities. This has to be taken into account when providing facilities for the public, but at the same time there's certain factors that have got to be taken into account, such as not causing eye pollution, so not ruining the views, not creating a lot of litter or destruction to the actual environment itself, not destroying any species, and also not going against any of the above points, not scaring off animals, not destroying plant life, not polluting the area,